Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. I am Taylor DiDonato with Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, a rehabilitation program specialist out of our Supported Employment and Transition Unit. I am also joined today by Ginger Scaife, a rehabilitation program specialist out of our Provider and Contract Management Unit. Today we will be discussing pre-employment transition services, aka Pre-ETS, and becoming a provider of Pre-ETS with OOD. First, let's take a look at an example of a Pre-ETS partnership. This video gives a glimpse into the partnership and collaboration of a school and a provider. This video can also be accessed on our Students 14 Plus page on ood.ohio.gov or our YouTube channel, Ohio OOD. Let's play the video.
In Ohio, there are approximately 120,000 students age 14 and over who have individualized education programs or a 504 plan. These programs and blueprints for a student with disabilities provide supports to remove barriers to the student's individualized education. Of these 120,000 students, 8% are also receiving vocational rehabilitation to help students explore, choose, prepare for, and enter a career. Throughout the state, families are connected with valuable tools and resources that will help prepare their child for their unique path to employment and/or post-secondary opportunities after high school. The Ohio Department of Education and Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, also known as OOD, collaborate with local school districts to help students with disabilities beginning at age 14. These services provide an early start in exploring career interests to develop workplace readiness skills through pre-employment transition services, more commonly referred to as Pre-ETS. Ohio's districts are eligible to apply to become providers for those Pre-ETS services, making the process more streamlined for the district and ultimately more beneficial for their students. This is Sarah Wilson, Transition Coordinator for Edison Local Schools. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Can you guide us through the process that you and the district went through to become a Pre-ETS provider?
Sure. First, we had to apply to become a Pre-ETS provider, and then we met with OOD and went through some training and also met with them to set up a curriculum that would best meet our students' needs. Our biggest concern at first was the billing. However, that's been a really smooth, seamless process.
Can you tell us what Pre-ETS services look like at Edison Local?
Yeah, at Edison, we chose to offer all 5 modules. We have instruction in self-advocacy, job exploration, counseling on post-secondary, work-based learning, and workplace readiness training. And within those modules, we can cater them to each individual student to meet their needs. That way that we know that they are prepared for life after high school. And also working with our OOD counselors, we know that our students are receiving the best care possible.
And we are happy to help.
Hey, there's Tanya Mortimer, a counselor with OOD.
OOD staff is always happy to work with local school districts like Edison Local and educators like Sarah.
So how does OOD work with districts to arrange these services at schools?
Typically, the schools will send a referral over to our agency, letting us know whether a student would possibly benefit from pre-employment vocational services. And if the school is a provider, they can actually provide those services themselves during the school day.
And how can a student benefit by their school becoming a pre-employment transition services provider?
Students can benefit because since their school knows them so well and the staff and the educators, they can kind of let us know on the referral and with the school records and with our team meetings what those services might be that would benefit them, especially with the pre-employment transition services. We can kind of map out which of the 5 or all 5 services they might benefit from.
Becoming a Pre-ETS provider is beneficial to teachers and administration too.
How so, Sarah?
Our teachers are able to accomplish all their IEP goals. We can also offer transition services to all of our students with disabilities throughout our district. The really nice thing about this program is that we can cater it to our individual students' needs. So if we have a student that needs more help in instruction and self-advocacy, or if they need more help in job exploration, we can focus on those individual needs. Our goal at Edison is that our students are prepared for life after high school.
Well, there you have it. Thank you, Sarah and Tanya.
You're welcome.
School districts are required to start the transition process at age 14. We hope that your district will consider becoming a Pre-ETS provider to enhance the transition services your district can offer. If you would like more information on these services, how to become a provider, or are new to the process and would like to know where to start, visit ood.ohio.gov.
For today's training, we're going to be having some objectives, including looking at the Pre-ETS transition service overview, implementation of pre-employment transition services, providing pre-employment transition services, service coordination and marketing, accessing pre-employment transition services information and documents, authorization and invoice process, reminders and takeaways, including next steps and staying connected to OOD, and OODs potentially eligible. I'm going to turn it over now to Taylor to start our presentation.
Thank you, Ginger. Let's start today with an overview of pre-employment transition services, or Pre-ETS. Pre-ETS are not just an OOD thing, but they are also a federal requirement. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, makes clear that youth with significant disabilities must be given every opportunity to receive the services necessary to ensure the maximum potential to achieve competitive, integrated employment. So let's break it down. Who? WIOA requires VR to set aside 15% of their federal funds to provide pre-employment transition services to students with disabilities who are eligible or potentially eligible. Students with disabilities must have a need for services. So what are Pre-ETS? They are introductory services intended to help students identify career interests. They can occur anytime and may possibly be the earliest set of services a student receives. They may be integrated in with other transition services throughout a VR case. So how do we provide Pre-ETS services? OOD, along with providers, collaborate with schools to arrange for Pre-ETS. So let's review the Pre-ETS big picture. Again, 15% set aside is for all of the Pre-ETS activities that we provide. For today, we will be focusing on the Pre-ETS subcategories, or the Fab 5, as I like to call them. The Fab 5 includes job exploration counseling, work-based learning, workplace readiness training, counseling on post-secondary opportunities, and instruction in self-advocacy. These services can occur anytime as long as the individual is considered a student with a disability. They may again be integrated with other transition services throughout a case. These services are not necessarily highly individualized, and they can be delivered individually or in groups. Most of these services are typically 6 to 8 hours of service total. Pre-ETS are typically provided in the school setting, but since 2020, they may also occur remotely if the student and team agrees that this will benefit the student. Furthermore, Pre-ETS are a group of service subcategories with specific definitions, approved activities, and outcomes. These specific service requirements can be found in the Services and Standards Guide on OOD's website. Pre-ETS are not a club or a set of social activities. You can't just call it Mr. Smith's Job Club All-Stars. It has to be called Pre-ETS. Further, Pre-ETS are intended to expand services, not be the only service the student participates in. So who can receive Pre-ETS? Students ages 14 through not yet 22 with a documented disability and are enrolled in school. This includes both potentially eligible and open VR cases. Normally, for all services under VR, you have to have an open case, but Pre-ETS are the one service subset, along with the auxiliary services to help support these, that you don't have to have an open OOD case. This also includes college students and CTP students who are not yet 22. Again, PE requests can come from the schools and don't necessarily have an assigned counselor. Pre-ETS can also be provided during an open eligible VR case. Pre-ETS doesn't mean pre-VR services. So pre-ETS should not delay the application for VR services. Pre-ETS is not a first step to access OOD, and it's not just for 14 and 15-year-olds. Remember that in open VR cases can still receive pre-ETS. Just request it via your OOD counselor. Touch on some of the ways that pre-ETS request form may be utilized. It could be a foot in the door for an OOD for those families that are unsure about VR services and the agency. And it also might be for individuals who may not need the depth and personalization of VR services. Service coordination and marketing are important when providing pre-ETS. To help with this, we are going to talk about roles and responsibilities, outreach, and marketing materials for pre-ETS. So, what role does the local office play regarding pre-ETS subcategories? At the local office level, there should be meetings to discuss what providers are in the area and getting them linked to schools that are interested in having pre-ETS available for their students. Local offices help facilitate and organize outreach efforts between schools and providers, which the benefit of schools and OOD having a coordinated way to approach schools helps providers establish themselves and build referral development. When working with schools who aren't established with pre-ETS, we want to be sure not to overwhelm them with several different providers all at once. We also don't want to overwhelm them with lots of providers in and out of their buildings, but we do want to offer informed choice for individuals with disabilities. For example, provider X might be at a school for Jimmy, while provider Y might be for Sally, and provider Z for Carter. This can possibly cause confusion on who the providers are assigned to. To provide support for providers, we want to make sure that they have what they need to provide the services for our students, such as the marketing material, the pre-ETS fact sheet, along with assisting them in communication with PCMU to access the PMP. Providers, you will help schools understand the approved curriculum and how you plan to implement it. You will get to know school personnel, the students and families that you'll be working with, along with talking with schools and VR staff about identifying additional students that may benefit from pre-ETS or other services. You're going to share resources with school personnel about performance, and the school may use this for their IEPs or school documentation for each student. As mentioned previously, pre-ETS can be provided in a variety of settings: schools, community, and virtually. So, as I mentioned before, pre-ETS can be provided in a variety of settings: schools, community, or virtually. Pre-ETS services can be provided virtually if appropriate for the student and the student has the needed technology. Varied levels of instruction for school districts, such as modified schedules and virtual options, it's going to look different for each district. Some schools might be using different platforms, such as Microsoft Teams, while others are using Zoom or Google Hangouts. You'll want to connect with school personnel on how they are engaging their students. Maybe it's a certain app or software, a specific day or time they currently connect, potentially phone calls, etc. As a pre-ETS provider, you will want to deliver pre-ETS in a way that is best for each individual student.
When we're talking about marketing materials, on your screen is an example of the pre-ETS flyer that is available on OOD's website. This is an informational flyer that you can share as a provider with families and schools. This approved pre-ETS providers must use OOD's pre-ETS form. You can attach a business card to this flyer. As you can see, there's a blank spot at the bottom left-hand side of one of the forms there. but you may not brand or use other materials to market this service. And again, as Taylor mentioned earlier, the service must be referred to as Pre-ETS or Pre-Employment Transition Services and not a career club, job club, etc. When we're talking about the requirements to become an approved Pre-ETS provider, you must have at least 1 year of working with students aged 14 to 21 with disabilities as your own entity or company. Providers are expected to develop a curriculum that meets OOD's services and standards guides requirements to deliver professional Pre-ETS services. There's a matrix resource that we'll talk about a little bit later to help you develop your curriculums. Pre-ETS is on the fee schedule, so each service subcategory has 3 parts, and there is a unit of service options for rare occasions. And then we're also going to talk about the Provider Management Program, or PMP. So again, talking about the requirements to become a Pre-ETS provider, you must have 1 year of experience as your own entity working with students with disabilities. Complete this Pre-ETS new provider training, which means watching this video in its entirety. Also watch the Safe and Sound Preventing, Addressing, and Reporting Significant Incidents video on OOD's website. Create a PMP account if you don't already have one, and submit a request to add each Pre-ETS service that you wish to provide in the PMP. Be sure to also follow procedures to be onboarded as one of OOD's new providers found on OOD's webpage entitled Become a VR Provider. These steps can be outlined on our website under the top of our homepage under Information Providers and then using the Become a VR Provider link. When we're talking about your curriculum, OOD does not have one set of approved curriculums. Providers must create a curriculum for each service they would like to offer. This does not need to be a minute-by-minute agenda, but should explain for each service how activities will help students achieve the required outcomes for the service, as requirements for each service are listed in the OOD Services and Standards VR Provider Guide. The curriculum must convey vocational rehabilitation activities, refer to Pre-ETS matrix for activities, outcomes, and resources, and see also the requirements in the Services and Standard Guide. So, for example, you would not have someone talking, to your students about college for an hour. Variety is the key. So not just speakers, videos, worksheets, role plays, or discussion, but a mixture of all those. And ideally, your curriculum needs to be clear enough for someone to walk in and be able to tell where you are in your curriculum. When we're talking about the standard requirements for all Pre-ETS subcategories, there's a part 1, which is coordination and pre-assessment. Parts 2, activities to achieve benchmarks. Parts 3, post-assessment and recommendations. Please note that pre and post-assessments can be found on OOD's provider forms page at the web address listed on your screen. You can also get to it by going to our homepage at ood.ohio.gov and under the Information for Providers link and then Provider Forms. The same is true under the Services and Standards Guide, which is also available under the Information for Providers link. When we're talking about the Pre-Employment Transition Services Attestation Form, this must be uploaded to the PMP after you've signed it. Curriculums must reflect good planning, outline learning goals and topics, including any worksheets, activities, and equipment needed, and be organized and ready to go when entering the classroom. Services provided that do not meet the Services and Standard Guide requirements for each Pre-ETS subcategory are not billable and will not be paid. If a provider has questions about a service requirement, contact PCMU at pcmu@ood.ohio.gov. On this page is a screenshot of the Pre-ETS matrix, and tools to identify include activities to be completed, and this also includes resources to help develop your curriculum for each Pre-ETS subcategory. This can be found on the Provider Training webpage on OOD's website, again under the Information for Providers link. The matrix can give you great ideas and resources when meeting the requirements of the service for each of the pre-ETS subcategories, using free information and activities on the internet to help you develop your own curriculum activities to meet OOD's service requirements. Overall, the matrix is a helpful tool to get to know pre-ETS expectations and outcomes. Pre-ETS on the fee schedule, there is one standard rate for all providers. There are service descriptions about each of the pre-ETS subcategories, including requirements and reporting requirements. And pre-ETS can also take place in a variety of settings, as Taylor mentioned. It can be remote, community-based, or school-based. Be sure to communicate with a counselor or coordinator and also the school staff when setting up services. This page shows you a screenshot from our services and standard guide, which outlines the rates of pre-ETS services. Just note that transportation for VR cases would need to be considered on a case-by-case basis. Similar to summer youth work experience, staff would need to consider location, hours, and amount of time in the car, parent support, and so on. As you know, transportation for potentially eligible cases is unable to be authorized at all. The service delivery can be oral, videos, verbal, and can be changed to meet the student's needs. But it cannot be a string of YouTube videos, but can incorporate videos along with instruction, activities, and group discussion. Overall, though, you cannot assign homework or start a video and leave the classroom. When we're talking about pre-ETS provision considerations, the service delivery, again, is based on students' needs. Pre-ETS is available statewide. For students with open cases who have an approved individualized plan for employment or IPE, the IPE must be amended to add pre-ETS. Support services such as a reader or interpreter are allowed for cases, all cases, but again, as I mentioned in the previous slide, transportation is not available for PE cases. If a potentially eligible case required more individualized services, they would need to apply for VR services, be found eligible, and work with a counselor or contractor to develop an individualized plan for employment. But open VR cases can follow the transportation procedure if that service is needed. This screen shows you right here how to access the PMP via OOD's website. So if you go to information for providers at the top of OOD's main page and you click on the PMP login, you'll be taken into the Provider Management Program, or PMP. PMP is managed by the provider, so when you add or delete services, change counties, things like that, that's something you submit in the PMP. Each individual pre-ETS services can be added to the provider's menu of service by the provider. Approved providers are responsible for maintaining the PMP account. Currently, we have one PMP account holder per provider. If a provider does not have a PMP account, they can go to the web address on the screen to create one. And if there's any trouble or issues with that, email pcmu@ood.ohio.gov with questions. In this section here, we're going to talk about the referral, authorization, and invoice process. There is a referral for pre-employment transition services form. We're going to talk about complete authorizations, the invoice report template, and the billing of pre-ETS services.
All right. So once the service is agreed upon and/or the IPE is updated, the VR staff will then create the referral letter. So there is a referral for pre-employment transition services form in Aware for our counselors to send and after filling out to our providers. So providers will receive the referral for pre-employment transition services along with their authorization. I want you to note that the referral for pre-employment transition services is different than the referral to CRP form. You will contact VR staff or a coordinator if the referral is incomplete or you feel you need more information. Let's talk about completed authorizations. Each authorization for pre-ETS will have one line item for each full month. If a student is receiving more than one pre-ETS service in a month, Each service is listed on a separate authorization. Please note that authorizations will only be drafted for services that are planned to take place.
When we're talking about completed authorizations, the Pre-ETS subcategory authorization dates cover 2 months at a time, and the dates shall not exceed the end of the fiscal year, the student's graduation date, unless the student is pursuing post-secondary education, which includes training that would lead to an industry recognized credential, or the student's 22nd birthday, whichever comes first. This screen is an example of a completed authorization. So on the screen, it has one Pre-ETS subcategory part, and this authorization is also good for a 2-month time period. Again, so each of the services have 3 parts. So there would be 3 separate authorizations for each Pre-ETS service, and each part would be authorized for a 2-month time period. Invoicing, the invoice template is specific to Pre-ETS. Form 13 for the Pre-ETS units of service and Form 14 for the Pre-ETS parts. Again, the Pre-ETS units of service is designed only to address specific needs and typically after the parts have been completed on an as-needed basis. There is one standard rate as outlined in the Services and Standard Guide, as I mentioned before. And per the fee schedule, Pre-ETS providers will submit an invoice report, which are together once a month for services provided the previous month by the 21st day of the next month, and will submit all the reports at the same time each month. Invoices and reports are to be submitted through the Aware Vendor Portal, or AVP, for payment processing, and your AVP account is set up after you complete new provider orientation. On this screen is a screenshot of part of the Pre-ETS billing form. Again, the base rate is built into the invoice. The total billed auto-populates based on the form completion. We always tell our providers complete it top to bottom and make sure they complete all the sections in green. Services can be provided in a 1-to-4 ratio, but no more than that. So that would be one provider staff up to 4 students. Could be 3 students, 2 students, or 1 student, but no more than 4 students to a group. Some of the items that are completed on the Pre-ETS report template include the provider name, invoice number, authorization number, service start, an end date for the month, the individual name, the staff person providing the services, the dates of services, the VR staff or VR contract coordinator, service description, appropriate outcomes achieved that are completed, referral questions answered from the counselor, a narrative section that is also to be completed, and collateral materials if appropriate.
All right. So now, where can we find the pre-employment transition service information and documents? The OOD website, of course. The OOD website has the forms available to you along with an explanation of the forms. On the OOD website, you can navigate to the Students 14 Plus page, and on the right-hand side of the page, as shown here with yellow arrows, you will find the Pre-ETS fact sheet and the flyer to help you understand the services and market the service as a provider of Pre-ETS. Individuals can search for different Pre-ETS providers by clicking a link on the OOD website. Once they have clicked this link, they are taken to the provider search. Here is a screenshot of the provider search on the OOD website. You want to ensure that your information as a provider is up to date so that VR staff, participants, and families can make informed choices regarding services. The provider search will continue to be updated as providers add Pre-ETS services. Let's talk about the Pre-ETS fact sheet. On this slide is a screenshot of the Pre-ETS fact sheet. This is a great tool for discussion with schools, families, and other partners. It helps break down what Pre-ETS are and how to provide and obtain them. Here we have the Pre-ETS request form for potentially eligible students. This is only required for PE cases and not for students that have an open VR case. Most individuals at OOD will not see these as they are processed by designated caseload assistants for PE only. This form includes required fields, information on where to submit the form, and what accompanying documentation is required. So why wouldn't a student you are working with be only potentially eligible? Well, they may be involved in other entities like DD and do not want to open a case at this time. Remember, this is not an application for services, but the goal is that each of the potentially eligible students eventually apply for VR services in the future. Providers of Pre-ETS are important in demonstrating how helpful these types of services can be for students. Again, school personnel complete and submit the form along with documentation. And I'll note here that both the form and documentation of the disability are necessary for PE cases. School personnel will fill out this form and then either send it through the request fax queue at ood.preemploymentrequestfax@ood.ohio.gov or at the request fax number 614-985-8435. The forms must be signed by the student, guardian, if applicable, and the school personnel. Then a qualified Pre-ETS provider must be indicated on the form, and any incomplete request forms will be sent back to the referring school personnel indicating needed information before it would be processed by the designated OOD staff. Confidentiality in the school. Some things to remember about confidentiality in schools. Providers should be very careful to not talk or engage students in the hallways. You should be safeguarding all private information while in the school setting. And make sure you have a release on file for different personnel that you may need to speak with.
So before we end our video today, we're going to talk about some reminders and takeaways, including providing remote services, use of Zixmail, and approved use of social media. Talking about providing remote services, please note that all providers must be willing and able to provide in-person services in Ohio. All remote services must be direct services to participants through Skype, FaceTime, or other electronic communication. Texting, excluding disability-related accommodations, is not an approved delivery method for remote services. At this time, remote services do not include any assigned task for the participant to be completed as homework, such as completing online training independently. To be counted as service time, activities must involve a staff person in direct communication with the participant. How should a provider document that services were provided remotely? As remote services continue to be utilized, it's important for a provider to document how services are delivered in reports. Providers will obtain and document the participant's agreement to participate in services remotely, the technology used, and the location of the participant receiving the service, such as the participant agreed to remote services and joined via Skype from their home. There is a resource link at the bottom of the screen that outlines instructional techniques to check for student understanding. Using Zixmail. As a reminder, all communication with OOD staff or coordinators should be done securely by using Zixmail. Messages in Zixmail are maintained for 30 days. So if you open up a Zixmail email, you may want to save it on your computer to avoid it disappearing after 30 days. Zixmail is a website where a provider can log in and view confidential email from OOD, and this Zixmail system keeps information between OODs and providers secure. This is just an extra layer of security that OOD uses. So you don't need to purchase Zixmail, but can access it for free by creating an account to view emails. OOD's logo and social media. Any social media post The work a provider does related to Pre-ETS must be approved by OOD first. Using OOD's logo in print and electronic material must be pre-approved by OOD. Send requests to OOD's communication department at info@ood.ohio.gov. Takeaways. Services are available to all students with a documented disability, whether a PE or open VR case. Pre-ETS services are not highly individualized services, but are based on standard outcomes. They are authorized for a 2-month time period. Authorizations must be sent with the referral for Pre-ETS form. And check the OOD website for updates along with signing up for OOD's VR provider news updates. Provider next steps. Provider applicants, again, must create a PMP or Provider Management Program account online at ood.ohio.gov under the Information for Providers tab. All required documentation must be submitted in the PMP. Provider applicants must submit background checks and any additional materials if students are going to be transported, for example. Pre-ETS attestation form must be signed and submitted within the PMP. Please become familiar with the VR fee schedule in the Services and Standards Guide, forms, and the fact sheet. Sign up for Provider News or the Granicus account. Sign up for Zixmail. Attend new provider orientation. And contact pcmu@ood.ohio.gov for any assistance during this onboarding process. On this screen is an example how to sign up for Provider News, also called Granicus. It's on our main homepage, ood.ohio.gov. If you scroll to the very bottom, you'll see a screen that looks like this one here. So you just enter your email and hit subscribe. And then on the next page, you select the third subcategory down, which is Vocational Rehabilitation VR Provider Emails. All of our past provider news is archived on the Information for Providers section of the OOD website. Being an OOD provider. Again, review the Services and Standards Guide for information on confidentiality, significant incident reporting, and more. The Significant Incident Report Forms, or SIRF, is required to be completed for major unusual incidents. Reviews of services and fiscal integrity, technical guidance, meetings, and more are a part of the OOD provider management and support.
OOD Pre-ETS provider contacts. There are several contacts that a Pre-ETS provider should know, including any designated local office staff, such as a school liaison, VRS liaison, or caseload assistants. The local office staff, especially caseload assistants, are not necessarily a point of contact, but they are helpful for providers to be aware of as they process the request and refer to the CRP for potentially eligible cases. Remember, if a student has a potentially eligible case, they are not assigned a specific counselor, like they would if they have an open VR case. Furthermore, providers should also know the contacts for the Provider and Contract Management Unit, or PCMU, along with the Supported Employment and Transition Unit, or SETU. OOD Central Office Staff Directory. Providers' main contacts will be out of the OOD Central Office staff units, including Jay Burns, the VR manager, and Ginger Scaife, the Rehabilitation Program Specialist in the Provider and Contract Management Unit. Also, Jessica Folsom, Supervisor, Brittany Bear, Rehabilitation Program Specialist, and myself, Taylor DiDonato, Rehabilitation Program Specialist in the Supported Employment and Transition Unit.
Thank you so much for joining us in our presentation today to become a Pre-ETS provider. If you have any questions, please email pcmu@ood.ohio.gov. Have a great day.